Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Hyperproof's webinar with increasing business requirements, emerging risks, and new threat vectors. Can your compliance program keep up? We have a lot of content for you today, and we're really glad you're here. Before we get started, I just want to talk to you about a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded, and you will be receiving the recording and the slides within 48 hours after this presentation. We have about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for live Q&A with our speakers. So please just, whenever you have any questions that come up during the presentation, type them into the Q&A box, and we will address them at the end. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you our speakers today. We have two awesome speakers today. We have Petrina and Peter, and let me introduce them. So Petrina is the Director of Channel Partnerships at Hyperproof, and she's a CPA and CISSP. She has a passion for helping organizations solve the complexity of compliance. Through her Big Four experience, Petrina has advised clients across the second and third lines of defense. Petrina has designed and implemented compliance programs, led assessments across multiple frameworks, and oversaw compliance managed service offerings. Her vast experience spans across sizes of organizations, ranging from startups through mid-size and global companies. We also have on this webinar Peter Sternkopf. Peter is the president and CEO of Vigilance Systems. Peter is a PMP and CEPA. His experience includes inside-out security and successful completion of many information security compliance engagements within the following frameworks: ISO 20001, SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2, GLBA, NIST 800-171, NIST 853, FedRAMP Privacy Shield, resulting in favorable audits and certifications. Other work Peter has done includes software development, internal investigations and forensic analysis, social sentiment analysis, mergers and acquisitions, information asset classification system design, e-discovery process improvement, information systems migration, website design and build, and several others. Thank you, Petrina and Peter, for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you, JC. Thank you for the great introduction. I'm really excited to be sharing this webinar and some insightful information with you. Compliance is always just such an interesting topic to discuss. But many people think of compliance as a 4-letter word, even though it's a 10-letter word. And the reasons why they think of it that way is because it can be very difficult to manage, and sometimes it can be seen as a necessary evil. But I believe that compliance is actually very strategic, and it can help you manage your risk to an acceptable risk tolerance level. It can remove barriers to entry and markets, and it can help keep your operations secure by helping you ensure that they're being performed in the way that they're intended to. So we're going to be talking to you today about how you can actually achieve that. So we'll be discussing why an ongoing compliance program is even important. We'll be sharing with you some key ideas in how you can approach compliance strategically without just adding a bunch of more work for you to do. And then we're going to share some key benefits and considerations that you can think about along your compliance journey.
And throughout my experience, I've seen a lot of compliance program managers often talk about continuous compliance, but they don't always practice it, which is unfortunate because classically, when they reach the end of their examination period and they're up for a new exam, they are not properly prepared to face that examination and having a successful outcome. Additionally, a lot of times the risk landscape changes very quickly, and organizations either aren't willing to add additional staff or The converse of that, they add a whole bunch of additional staff where it's only a short-term objective and it's not a long-term journey. And sadly, that results in either overstaffing and overcosts or understaffing.
Great. Thanks for sharing that perspective, Peter. Looking forward to hearing more about some of those specific examples. To begin our discussion today, let's start with the why. Why is it important to have an ongoing compliance program? And we've highlighted just a couple of key buckets of areas of why this is even important for you to be listening to. And the first is risk reduction. Compliance is basically a set of things that you do to keep your organization at an acceptable risk tolerance level. So that means that in order to prevent your organization from taking on too much risk or exposing yourself to unwanted risk, you really need to have a compliance program that helps you maintain those levels. The second area that I think is really important about compliance is quality recognition. What does that mean? It means that your customers and your vendors and your partners expect you to be secure. And by having a solid compliance program, it can help you in two ways. One, you may have a certification that is widely recognized that you can provide to your customers and partners. And then two, you can avoid being in one of the unfortunate publications about having a breach or exposed vulnerability. Another reason is around operational controls alignment. I talked a little bit about this at the beginning. From an operational risk perspective, you want to make sure your organization is doing the operations that you've defined in the way that they're intended to do. This helps you be efficient. It helps you manage your revenue streams and avoid unnecessary expenses and vulnerabilities. And the last one that I'm going to share before asking Peter for his perspective is around having better awareness. There's a saying, you don't know what you don't know. So it's important to be very cognizant and intentional about what you do know about your risk and how you're managing it, but also keep one eye on what's around the corner. What are some of the emerging risks that you need to be thinking about and potentially preparing for? Peter, I'd love to get your thoughts.
Continuing down the list, and these are a little more soft in measurability, but no less important. Peace of mind really refers to, in my perspective, being able to sleep at night. As the CTO of my previous life, as CTO of a litigation support services company, one of the biggest things that kept me up at night and kept me from sleeping, and when I say kept me from sleeping, I'm talking in a literal sense, where we weren't confident that our security controls that were in place were managing our customers' information risks appropriately. And until we put an appropriate compliance framework in place, manage the controls and risks, or the risk and controls, and exercise continuous compliance, I was at that point able to sleep, but previously not. So peace of mind is for the customers, staff, board members, suppliers, and other interested parties that are key to or keen in ensuring that their information is secure. Another more soft but very important aspect is being able to demonstrate your focus on security. So the company is taking information security seriously and has a program in place to manage that information assets that you're trying to protect. So it's not only for customers, partners, and third parties, but of course it's also for industry exposure. So it's good for competitors to see that you have a program in place and you're focused on information security and compliance, because then it makes them think, geez, this company's really good, and we need to step our game up. So that really implies an impact to the greater marketplace, that if each company steps up to their obligations to secure people and companies' information, then the entire marketplace improves. So it's more of a soft thing, but it's very important. Then, of course, continuous improvement is an easy, understandable thing. Again, year-over-year improvement of the security of the organization's information assets. Then, of course, proactive management. That one's a little bit different in some people's minds, but for us, it's really moving away from reactive security initiatives in favor of more proactive security incident reduction. So again, if you have accounted for all your risks and have the appropriate controls in place and framework in place to manage all that, then you can focus on being more proactive in your risk reduction. Petrina?
I apologize, I was on mute. Thank you. Now we're going to talk about what it means to run an ongoing compliance program. We talked about why it's important, but what does it actually mean? Because I know there's a lot of different definitions of ongoing compliance. And so the first thing that I think you need to really think about is making sure that your compliance program aligns with the goals, vision, objectives, and mission of your organization. Compliance really should be part of your business strategy. It should be specific to your industry and your business processes and the unique needs of your organization and the type of business that you have. One size certainly doesn't fit all. And I mentioned this already about maintaining an acceptable risk tolerance level. And that can only be achieved if it's specific to your risk tolerance level. So really aligning, your compliance with the purpose and vision of your organization is important. Another thing is that, compliance is not something you can just do and walk away. Unfortunately, there's always emerging risks. And so when you think about, standing up, a really good compliance program, you still need to be aware that there are things that are emerging right now that maybe you didn't think about when you initially designed your compliance program. So it's important to curate your compliance program over time through things like risk assessments and ensure that you're not only addressing the risks of today, but you're also preparing for the risks of tomorrow. Peter, I know you have a few thoughts on the next one.
Yeah, sure. Whether people understand this or not, I think we would all agree that you don't hear about a bunch of gold heists and people trying to obtain gold in an illegal way like they do with information. And information has become one of the biggest obtaining information has become one of the biggest industries in the world. And I think we can all agree that information is more valuable than gold because someone else will always want it. And they want to use it, exploit it, and make money on it. So I think that's what our world's come to. And there's a lot of moving parts and details to pay attention to. To me, it's like a big bowl of spaghetti. There's a lot of intertwined noodles and sauce, and if you're non-vegan, then meatballs. And unraveling all that and making it consumable is quite a challenge. Such as ensuring that you're having consistent management reviews of your information security management system. You're including executive management in your reporting responsibilities so they understand the performance not only of your team, but also of the program itself that you have in place to manage your risks and controls. So that's really important to be able to report on that to executives. Then it's always important, and that just kind of falls in place with what I just said. But you have to understand whether your compliance program is effective, and not just today, but ongoing. Is it designed and built to maintain effectiveness and ultimately protect information? So all that's part and parcel of why it's important to run an ongoing compliance program that's continuously improving and managed not just in the 11th hour before your next audit.
Great. So, it's in the last point that we're going to talk about here is that, it's important to make sure that you have some level of accountability. So in thinking about, your risks, that's kind of like the first step, right? And then you're defining the controls that you're standing up to address those risks. But from an accountability perspective, it's important to make sure you have ownership over those risks and you know who's responsible for performing those control processes and that you have appropriate visibility into each of those areas. Peter, I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted to mention here.
No, I think that's a very, very important point. But I've seen a lot of organizations try to just assign one or two individuals to manage their compliance program and not include the business owners. And really, the people that are responsible and maybe even produce the risk are also responsible for the appropriate controls. And to hold those people not only accountable, but include them as an interactive solution to the overall program is really important. And it helps build that culture of compliance, right? And your ongoing information security maturity profile. So absolutely, everyone in the organization is responsible for information security compliance.
So Peter, I know that there's been a lot of changes, particularly recently, so maybe you could talk us through some of those changes that you wanted to highlight here.
Sure. And I just want to reiterate what the slide says here. It says continual improvement is a requirement in most frameworks, and that's absolutely true. You just can't meet your compliance and just pass an audit and get your certificate or your report, your favorable report that says, hey, you passed or you look pretty good concerning what we saw, but you just can't rest on your laurels and you have to continuously improve. ISO is a great example where it is an absolute control requirement. But I did want to point out there's a couple things that are really important. There's new regulations constantly being dumped upon our professionals. One of those is CMMC. It's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. That specifically is a replacement for GLBA NIST 800-171. I know that's a lot of acronyms and numbers, but really that's all dealing with controlled unclassified information. For example, personally identifiable information, PII, such as health documents, proprietary material, information related to legal proceedings, all of that is CUI. One of our customers down in California, in Claremont, they fall under the CUI because they're a college. So personally identifiable financial information, in other words, colleges that receive federal funding, they're subject to the NIST 800-171 controls, but now the CMMC. So that's a big new regulation that people are scrambling to grapple. Previously, NIST 800-171 was not a certification, it was just a guideline. They didn't even have an audit for it yet. We created an audit for it, and we were able to measure it and report on it and show performance, but the government hadn't initiated that yet. So this is a maturity of the framework, which is actually significant and exciting, but it can be overwhelming as well to some compliance officers. The other, and real quick, I'll make this quick because it all makes sense to everybody, there's also emerging risks. So back back in the day when cloud was new and companies were hesitant to jump onto the cloud platform and leverage that power. And it's taken a lot of years for companies to migrate there, but that was a risk. So that was emerging risk back then, but now, and it doesn't sound like it should be, but now we have remote workers. That's a new emerging risk. And it makes sense because now entire workforces are working remotely because of this COVID-19 thing. And you know for a fact that somewhere, someday, an MBA is going to figure out that remote work is much cheaper than housing people in brick and mortar. And what that will lead to is a shift to more global marketplace, or a global workforce, I should say, where a lot of those jobs are going to be shipped overseas. So that compounds the challenges in maintaining security and following different regulations like GDPR and CCP. Gosh, I can't remember all the acronyms. Anyways, all the different regulations controlling privacy for the U.S. and the EU.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for scaring us all about our jobs.
We got to stay sharp.
Now, to continue on the fear factor, we'll talk about some of the complexity of compliance. First of all, I don't think it's surprising to anyone that cyber attacks are very prevalent. You may not know that according to a study at the University of Maryland, they occur actually every 39 seconds. So just do the math real quick, how many had happened while we were having this webinar. Another thing is that's related to the complexity of compliance is that most companies have multiple compliance frameworks and standards that they need to comply with. Some of them are a pull and some of them are a push. Some compliances are barriers to entry, like a SOC 2 report. Your customers or your partners are asking you for a SOC 2 report, so it's sort of like mandatory that you do that. And some of them are more internal, like, you want to be secure, and so maybe you want to align with PCI or NIST or, regulatory frameworks as well. So because a lot of organizations, and according to, the study that's cited here, 70% of companies in the study are subject to 5 or more compliance standards. Another thing, and Peter, I know you talked about this already, is this wave of new privacy regulations. So there's 80 plus countries that are subject to privacy regulations. And in the US, we have states kind of leading that front, and each of the states are sort of defining their own privacy laws. And some of those privacy laws are redundant and some actually conflict with each other. So it's really difficult to understand and build and manage your compliance program in an efficient way because of all the complexity.
Yeah, not only by state, but also the state and industry. So, for example, financial industries, and I'll just give a quick example. In New York State has privacy rules that are specific to financial services, and that adds another level of complexity. So just not federal or just not EU or a worldwide type of compliance of privacy rules, but you've got our own country, states, and then industry. So it really compounds the complexity sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Peter. Managing international, federal, and state absolutely adds a different layer of complexity. So with this complexity can come the feeling of being overwhelmed. It's not surprising that so many compliance professionals are being overwhelmed. And in a CISSP report, 69% of compliance professionals reported being understaffed, which is challenging when we're just been discussing all these new sort of needs and emerging risks and regulations. To be understaffed even exacerbates that. Also, there's this need. Everyone wants to understand that the people that they're doing business with are secure, and so there's this sort of growing need for security assessments. And many companies are finding that they're just constantly responding to their customer security assessments that are asking them, if they're compliant and secure in other areas. And then finally, as a result of COVID, unfortunately, compliance teams are being hit. And so compliance teams are being, downsized or furloughed. And so that's actually impacting, this and managing your compliance and getting your arms around compliance even more difficult to do. Peter, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts you'd like to share.
Yeah. There's a couple thoughts on that. We have a customer down in San Francisco who, they're responsible for multiple compliance programs, SOC 2, ISO, PCI, and they're a financial institution. And they lost a great member of their team. They're just now hiring an additional team member after they, of course, lost some of the best people. And then there's the converse of that, where sometimes the cybersecurity workforces are remaining pretty strong because they're an absolute necessity. It just depends on the company. So anyway, I think it's interesting sometimes that they grow it or they remain strong or they shed some of their staff and they have to rehire. So it's kind of a volatile situation, but I think it'll pass. So this is really an important. It's a short but important slide. It's pretty straightforward as far as what it says and how we address operational challenges. As we all know, businesses, especially small startups, typically practice what's called lean startup. So it's a series of continuous pivots. Our business is no different. And what that creates is potentially new products and services, maybe new marketplaces and focus, and that will add complexity as far as potential risks and the appropriate controls to manage those risks that need to be addressed. So as a continuous compliance program, those are some of the things you have to look out for. And it's important not to lose sight of what your company's doing and just focus on your own world, but really being integrated as part of the company's objectives, goals, and operational standards. Now, we already hit those points, but it's always good to reinforce those. The other thing that really adds to the challenges in maintaining compliance, and I know a lot of us on this call can empathize with this, but a lot of organizations have a myriad of tools that they use to manage their compliance programs. And a quick example, you've got Box, Google Drive, spreadsheets, calendar, for meetings. You've got Slack or other instant messaging internally. Collaboration projects such as Asana or I can't think of the other one. I was going to say Monday or some other ones. And then you have face-to-face meetings. So you've got all these things that you're trying to manage a compliance program with, and it becomes very unruly sometimes in keeping all that stuff in check and making sure that you're hitting your compliance commitments. So that results in very inefficient and redundant processes that sometimes overlap and you're doing extra work with when you have multiple frameworks. For instance, if you have PCI DSS and you've got ISO 27001 as part of your two frameworks that you're trying to keep compliance with, there's a lot of overlap as far as controls and risks and how you're trying to manage all that. So it's possible to do double work. Petrina, anything else to add on that?
No, I think that's a great point, Peter. There's just like a lot of tools. We talked about how there's this growing need for compliance from various reasons, and that it's increasingly complex, and teams, especially because of COVID-19, are being impacted. And so with all of that, it's just this situation where there's a lot of wasted time, there's a lack of visibility, and things are just not scalable because there's the way that compliance is being managed, as you mentioned, across so many different applications, there's really, in many cases, not in compliance organizations, a centralized place for everything you need to do to support your compliance.
Right. And again, when it gets too manual or there's that lack of visibility, transparency into your program, sharing the status and the performance of what you're working on, and really not just highlighting the team, but highlighting the importance of that program and adding value to the organization is really important. And then, as you add more frameworks, if it's not a scalable program or you don't have the tools in place to manage that set of frameworks and programs, then, it becomes a really people-intensive, labor-intensive drain on the organization. And you can't be consistent in how you manage your compliance that way. And I'll tell you one quick example that I've seen a lot of is user access controls. We have customers that don't consistently look at their user access or put that onus on the department heads to ensure that the right people have access to the right systems based on their roles, and that they're reviewing that access consistently. In fact, I talked with a customer yesterday who had an outside consulting firm that did their IT. When I say an outside IT firm that did their work. And then they transitioned to a new IT firm that did their work, again, outside the organization. But they never turned off the access for the previous company until 4 or 5 months later. So, those types of things can really bite you in the keister, and you want to avoid that.
Absolutely. Access reviews are always a challenge. So there's lots of consequences for noncompliance. Even though compliance and managing it can be challenging, you have to do it, because if you don't, there's consequences. And those consequences come in many forms. One key form is the financial impact. So if you are not in compliance with certain things, or, unfortunately you have a breach because you weren't secure, there are penalties that you can pay through either to the regulators or through lawsuits, and then reputational damage. You may have some lost revenue. Organizations may not want to do business with you. And there also are, as I mentioned, barriers to entry, in that many organizations now, before they'll partner with you, and many customers, before they'll feel comfortable doing business with you, they want to see that you have specific certifications such as ISO or SOC 2 or things like that. And so compliance can actually not only impact your revenue, it can impact your expenses as well.
Yeah,
Peter, I know you've got some thoughts on this.
Yeah. A huge customer down in Texas, actually they're a nationwide company, but down in Texas, they're subject to the Securities and Exchange Commission and FINRA and those regulatory requirements. And those fines and sanctions can be massive. You have to keep in mind, a lot of these regulatory agencies, part of their revenue stream, and I use that word revenue with emphasis, is, the revenue is in imposing fines and sanctions. So they're looking for things that are wrong. And you want to safeguard against that. And so it's just, that's a massive financial cost, but it's also a reputational cost. And frankly, if you damage your reputation or your relationship with the FCC or FINRA, then they just keep coming back for more. And that's something you want to avoid. And we all know GDPR, for example, has been very costly for companies. And sometimes it's small, like I think it was somewhere around, $700,000 for Hilton as one of their GDPR sanctions. We all know it's somewhere around 20 million or 4% of annual global turnover, whichever is greatest when you get fined by the GDPR EU. But that's one thing, but losing your job is significant, or it may be significant to some people, but it could be worse. If you're the CTO or the CISO or Chief Compliance Officer for an organization, and it's your responsibility, and the company gets fined, $1 billion or more, then there can be some other criminal sanctions imposed against you as well.
Excellent point, Peter. So, Peter, do you want to share with us some other challenges?
Yeah, I'd love to touch on this because I've seen it happen with so many firms where, again, they lose sight of that the company vision, mission goals, objectives, and business requirements, and they don't support those. It's really the compliance team's job to align and support the business. This is not protecting information, it's supporting the business. And really what's something I get excited about is when you're protecting that information, you're increasing the valuation of the business. And if you can point that out and prove that it improves the valuation of the business because now you have a compliance program in place that you can market, or it may help in an initial public offering if you go public, mergers and acquisitions, it changes the valuation of that transaction. And when you can impact that in a positive way because you know where your information is, you know it's protected, you can prove it, your data's secure, and you have your data house in order, it has a significant positive impact to the organization. So I think that's probably the most important thing just to point out about not where the challenges are, but where the positive aspect of meeting those challenges. And as the image shows on the screen, pushing that rock up the hill, because it's not a static rock. It's always going to be moving.
Unfortunately, that is
Petrina.
Yeah, I do agree that it is always going to be moving, and so I think you do have to be proactive on your strategy, on really how you think about this. And I think that kind of leads us into our next slide, which is what are some things that you should be thinking about as you move towards continuous compliance. And the first thing is that if you're complying with a regulatory body or a specific framework and certification that you have an interest in sustaining, it's important to stay up to date on what's changing in either of those situations. The rules change, the requirements change, the interpretation of those change, and so it's really important that you have you're mindful of that, and you have a process in place to become aware of these changes, and you can adapt and be agile accordingly.
Yeah, and one of the things, just to touch real quick on regulatory requirements, and I'll give you a quick example of why it's important. If you have a data retention or information retention policy, and then you have a retention schedule pursuant to your policy, and if you're not keeping that up to date, that schedule up to date, and then all the mechanisms in place to properly manage that, the exposure up to the company could be significant if you have information that you would schedule to be destroyed or actually put into storage, or you're not keeping information or you're keeping too much information, then there's significant legal penalties on that as well, or financial penalties. So keeping up with the regulations on the terms of maintaining that information and action is really important. And then for really planning and prioritizing your approach to continuous compliance, one of the things that people often miss is really the foundational documents that are important to, I call them the building blocks to a compliance program. For example, an information assets inventory. So that's just not your information assets, it's your physical assets, it's software, that you've licensed, and it could be even your open source software. So having all that and understanding that you have that information, there's risks associated with each, flows right into a risk assessment, and that flows into a risk treatment plan. And then there's actionable output and assignments to the control owner. So that's all part of the foundational type of flow that is really important to prioritizing your continuous compliance.
Right. And then it's also important to have governance and accountability. I know that's sometimes the word governance, it makes people it's not something that people want to prioritize, but it absolutely is important because you stand up these things, and it's important to make sure that you're overseeing them and ensuring that they're working the way they're supposed to work. And then from an accountability perspective, you have to make sure that there's people who are responsible for doing, the components of your compliance program, and that there's an escalation mechanism that if people are not doing what they're supposed to, there is some level of accountability accountability that is taken.
Yeah, and one of the echo chamber things that we hear a lot of is we'll hear people say it's all about people, processing, technology. And they don't always put it in that order, which is unfortunate because sure enough, people are the core of any compliance program, and that's the most important component. Process and procedures follows that. Of course, standards are folded into that as well. Technology should only be considered in managing a compliance program when you need to add efficiencies. Well, when do you need to add efficiencies? Well, you need to add efficiencies when you're building or maintaining or continually improving your compliance program. It's some type of compliance operations platform is really a key to success. Again, we talked about Excel spreadsheets, Google, Slack, ticketing systems, like Jira, project management tools, all those things. It becomes arduous to manage, and frankly, it's for the birds. And we'll hit this again in the further slide, but automation is really the icing on the cake once you have some of your core documentation gathered and ready to execute on.
Well, that's certainly a lot to think about, Peter. Why don't you talk us through how you approach prioritizing some of these things?
Well, I think the first and foremost important aspect of any compliance program, whether you're doing an implementation or running continuous compliance on existing programs or even adding new frameworks, executive sponsorship is number one most important thing. And it's just not saying, hey, I need the dollars. Hey, I want you to say, yes, I can do this. But it's really including the executive management, or at least the right executives, and having a voice at the table that supports your initiative. And you have to gain that executive support through things like demonstrating information controls, extracting value, and really showing them that it's changed in the valuation of the organization, giving them additional tools like marketing, that compliance, cost savings, improved efficiencies. I always tell our customers that you will have better operational excellence when you put all these things in place. And they first look at me with their eyes crossed and say, what? Like I'm crazy. It's going to cause us to spend more money, more time, and lose our resources toward managing a compliance program. It's quite the opposite. When you put the right things in place, you actually are more efficient in how you work as an organization. So I think that's really important. And we already talked about information assets management, but those are kind of the top two that you look at to really maintain your journey or continue your journey on the compliance righteousness path.
I absolutely agree with that, Peter. And just kind of continuing down the prioritization path is the concept of risk management and risk assessment. So addressing emerging risks and uncovering new ones, one great way to do that is through having a practice of periodic risk assessments, where you can evaluate how effective your controls are in addressing the risks that you previously identified, and potentially uncover new risks that were not evident prior to that. And then, of course, after the risks are identified, coming up with a strategy to bring those risks through an acceptable level, which typically comes in the form of putting controls in place to help reduce those risks and manage them on an ongoing basis. We've already talked about governance and oversight, but that's just something that's really important, because if you do all these things, but as you mentioned, Peter, don't have the right level of executive sponsorship and right oversight onto how effective they are, then they're not going to be as fruitful as they could be. So governance and oversight is always a key foundational piece of your compliance program.
No doubt. So we already talked about the importance of leveraging automation to gain efficiencies. So as an example, I'll just give you an example of why implementing some type of compliance operations platform to replace all those other pieces and how you're managing your compliance program is important. If you want to advance the slide one, that'd be great. Not that it matters, because it's only 5 words. But here's a great example. Some people understand what a security information event management system is. Some people say SIEM, some people say SIM, but basically it's a software solution that collects data security from different things like network devices, servers, domain controllers, and more. Now, if anyone on this call is technical, they'll understand that all those pieces, managing those independently or with a disparate separate set of tools to try to manage all those components, it's very difficult, and it lacks continuity and really understanding what's going on in that information security network of tools. So that's an example of how you can improve automation. Very much like your compliance program, if you can add an automation to it. When I say automation, there are some automation factors, but really a collaboration tool that encompasses all the pieces that you need to run your programs, your compliance programs, and that's ideal. Petrina, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
No, I think that compliance automation is really important, and a lot of times some of the automation that we see is what you mentioned, and that you have vulnerability scanning systems and network monitoring systems and things like that. But there's also a key piece to get your arms around your whole compliance program and see where things are at and monitor your compliance program end to end, and not just necessarily the controls inside it. And so one of the things we do at HyperProof, that's why we're in business, is that we have a compliance operations platform that helps give you visibility and incredible oversight of your compliance operations, so you can actually monitor and the effectiveness of your compliance programs in just one system. We're the system of record for compliance. And so leveraging automation absolutely is important at the control level, but it's also helpful to address some of these things that we talked about today, the changes, the inefficiencies, the redundancy, the lack of accountability. Those things can be addressed through a compliance operational platform like HyperProof.
Right. Some companies prefer to leverage outside resources to add to their quiver, so to speak, to the strength of their program. It's difficult to understand and manage all of the different frameworks and requirements and compliance criteria to meet not only they would just meet the requirements, but also to pass an audit confidently and competently but some companies choose more of an approach with compliance as a service. So that's some of the other options as far as how you interact and manage your compliance program ongoing, or even at the beginning.
Great. So now I think it's time for some Q&A. JC, I don't know if you have some questions from the audience for us.
Hi, thanks. Yes, one question we have is, are there any specific areas to prioritize or get started in terms of starting to gain some efficiencies and moving towards ongoing compliance?
Peter, you want to take that one?
I'll take part of it. Again, I think that the real challenge is, and some people call them crosswalks, some people call them common controls, but there's, I think the most important efficiency to add first is when you have multiple frameworks and multiple compliance programs that you want to leverage those artifacts being documentation, whether it's policy, process, and procedures, but artifacts are also evidence or proof that those things are effective. So I think the most important thing to help make those or create those efficiencies is to identify which controls are common to which frameworks and how you can leverage them. And if they're not good enough for one level of framework or compliance program, for instance, maybe you have a SOC 2 control in place, but it's not to the standard of ISO 27001, and you have both in place. Well, you want to shore that one control up to the ISO 27000 standard so that it's good for both, and it'll exceed the SOC 2 standard. So I think those crosswalks and really leveraging that will add so much efficiency to your programs, and it'll save a ton of time and aggravation when you're going through those audits, whether they're the annual audits or an internal audit, to ensure that you're minimizing your number of effort to get those documents, but also the documents themselves and the number of documents. Petrina, I don't know if there's something else you want to add.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Peter. I think designing your controls in such a way that they satisfy multiple control requirements is key. It removes a lot of redundancy. I think another way to help support this is to reduce manual tasks. So much of compliance, is housed in spreadsheets, and you're spending time requesting things from people, and there's just an incredible amount of manual activities associated to compliance. And so as much as you can sort of automate those things and make them visible and easy to manage, I think that helps tremendously with efficiency, just again, automating the manual tasks.
Yeah, I'd shore that up. Visibility, transparency, reportability, and really holding people accountable to the things they have to get done for your compliance program. It's great to be able to have that efficiency or that communication evident to all involved, and it really is a joint accountability type of approach to it, which is really nice. And it really works well.
Let's see if we have other questions. I haven't seen any other questions come in so far. So I guess that means that we could wrap up for today. And thank you for being here today. And we hope that you found this presentation useful. On the slide right here, you can feel free to reach out to Petrina or Peter if you have any specific questions to them. And we will be sending you the slides and the recording shortly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
JC. Thank you, Petrina.
Thank you.
Thank you, attendees. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.